McLaren prices continue to fall during the beginning of 2023. They're down by 8 to 12% compared to their market top. So if you're a buyer, you could use this to your advantage. You could either wait a moment to see how the price drop will unravel or leverage it during your negotiations. Now the continuation of the downward price trend is a little bit surprising. In some other markets we have seen that the speed at which prices are falling decreased slightly. And this might have something to do with the arrival of spring. Now when it comes to the McLarens, we can only see this in the 570S market. So how bad is the situation exactly? Let's investigate the price trends, but as always we'll first have a look at the current market. Over here we have the US market in March 2023. In total there are 557 cars for sale, and this is 7% less than in December. This decrease is slightly less than what we've seen in other markets. Now when it comes to the prices, we can identify roughly 3 categories. In the first category, we have the 12C, the 650S, the 570S and the GT. If your budget stretches to approximately $165,000, you can choose between these 4 models. In the second group we find the 675 LT, the 720S and 600 LT. You need to spend at least $240,000 to enter this segment, but it does give you access to the praised 675 LT. Finally we have the 765 LT at the top. This car is priced in a different league. Prices start at $465,000 and can go up to $750,000. Look by the way at the price difference between a 2022 and 2021 car. It's a gap of $145,000. I'm not sure if buyers at this price point care about that, but it's certainly a large drop. What's also relatively large is the price decrease during the last 3 months. Prices dropped by 3 to 6%. The only exception to this are the 570S prices. They were relatively flat. Let's have a look at the price trends and figure out which models lost the most and which the least. We start with the oldest models. Over here we have the price trend for the 12C and the 650S, and we can see that they're very similar. Prices increased during the pandemic, topped last summer and have been decreasing ever since. This is then also how the price trend looks in most car markets. The 650S lost 2.4% during the last 3 months, and prices are now 8.4% down compared to the market top. But long-term owners have no reason to worry. Prices are still up by 8.5% compared to May 2020. You can see by the way that the price trend fluctuated a bit during the last 9 months. This is the result of changes in the market composition. The confidence interval over here shows the most accurate trend, and that is clearly down. If we have a look then at the 12C, we can see that prices decreased slightly more since last summer. Prices are down by 11%. Compared to April 2020, the price increases with 8.2%, slightly lower than in the 650S market. Now what's interesting about the 12C market is that the drop is mainly driven by the oldest cars, so the ones from 2012 and the ones with a relatively high mileage. Low mileage cars from 2013 and 2014 lost less. The difference is approximately $10,000. There is of course some talk that this car could be a future classic, and if that's the case, it makes sense that this effect shows up for the most recent cars with the lowest mileage. It is a bit too early to make any bold statements about this, but it is something to keep an eye on. We also cannot make any crazy statements about the 570S market. Price trends are still down, but we can say that prices are among the strongest ones when compared to other models. Depreciation rates decreased. Have a look at this. During the last 3 months, downward momentum faded away in the coupe market and decreased marginally in the Spider market. 570S prices were stable and Spiders decreased by 2.6%. So compared to the market top of May 2022, coupes are only down by 5.7%, and that's an extremely good result. Spiders decreased slightly more, but a drop of 12% is still acceptable when compared to, let's say, a 911. So did prices bottom in the 570S coupe market? Not really. Depreciation rates were lower than for other models, but if we look at the interquartile range, we can see a downward sloping trend. And the same applies to the lower confidence interval. Moreover, also when you compare the price development over time for the same cars, you will see that prices still decrease slightly. It will therefore be fascinating to see what happens between March and June. Will we see that this trend continues, or will prices start to drop again? We really need more data to form conclusions on the direction. And with that, it's time to have a look at the GT market. You can see that I don't have as much data as for the previous models, so we can only analyze the drop since the market top. And this reveals that prices decreased by 9.3%. Again, not the highest rates when compared to other cars. Cars from 2022 lost slightly more than the older ones, but the difference is not night and day. The trend, however, is linearly decreasing, so I expect that it will continue in this direction for the foreseeable future. But what about the LT models? They are a bit more special and also a bit more rare. Over here we have the trends for the 600 LT and the 675 LT. These trends include the coupe and the spiders. The latter ones are more expensive, but the price trends are similar as in the coupe market. Evaluating the drop since the market top, we can see that 600 LTs decreased by 11% or $29,000 and 675 LTs by 12% or $40,000. So there's not really a difference between them, or between the LTs and the models that we covered so far. Everything is down by roughly 8 to 12%. The only model for which prices decrease significantly more is the 765 LT. We can see that coupes lost 20% or an astonishing $130,000 since their market top of last summer. That's really a large drop, also when compared to the rest of the market. What can explain this large price decrease? Were they perhaps overpriced to begin with? Let me know your thoughts down below in the comment section. Spiders lost even more, if we are to believe this trend. But we shouldn't. Market supply was extremely low in May and August, so this trend is unreliable. I think it's more likely that the drop in the spider market is the same as in the coupe market. Luckily for 720S owners, the price trends in that market are similar to the ones that we saw in other non-LT markets. Over here we have the price development per model year and per roof type. So this means that the blue line, for example, shows the price development for a 2018 coupe. I know that there are quite many lines, but I would like to focus on the trends, not so much on the individual lines. Now looking at the trends, we can see that prices decreased by an average of 12%. That's no big surprise. The interesting thing about this graph is that it reveals the difference between the new and the old models. Look at the 2018 and 2019 coupes. Prices for those cars followed the market trend. They increased, topped, and have been decreasing since the summer. This doesn't apply to newer cars. We can see that all prices for cars above $320,000 never soared. They were flat or decreased immediately when the car was driven out of the showroom. In other words, those cars depreciated as expected. There was no scarcity in those markets, so it really paid off if you went for a used car instead of a brand new one in 2020 or 2021. Depreciation rates through 2022 and the beginning of 2023 were similar across the model years and roof types. Note by the way that the purple and grey line deviate from the rest, but this is a result of the low supply. So we saw now that prices decreased by approximately 8 to 12% compared to their market top of last summer. In the beginning of the video we asked ourselves the question, how bad is this drop actually? It turns out to not be too severe. In fact, it's a good result. In last week's video we saw, for example, that AMG GTs dropped by 12.4%, and that the same rate applies to most 911 Carreras. Who would have thought that? McLaren's having the upper hand when it comes to depreciation. Yet, price trends are of course still trending down, and we saw that there are no or very little indications in the price trends that this will change anytime soon. So if you're in the market for a McLaren, you can of course use this to your advantage. Price adjustments for cars that have been advertised for sale for a while might of course come down with a delay. After all, that's not something that a dealer likes to do. On average, a 570S is for example advertised for sale for 70 days. So the closer the cars come to that point, the more likely it is that prices will be reduced or that you can use it during your negotiations. Now when it comes to newly advertised cars, one would expect that they are aligned with the current market prices. And with that we arrived at the end of this video. Now if you enjoy this data-driven way of analyzing car prices, but would like to see a video for a different car, head over to my channel. Over there you'll find market updates for a large variety of cars. Can't find the car you're looking for? Let me know the name of the car for which you would like to see an analysis by commenting it down below in the comment section. Once there are enough requests for a car, I'll make a video about it. As always, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next week for a new video.